Before you is the official field diagram of spectral density and Fourier analysis of the brushstroke, the rest-ray edit graphic. This is the mathematical passport of the second patent of Alexander Rai, which precisely maps the frequency modulation of matter in the paintings, including Enoch and 200 angels. Along the x-axis, the spatial frequency omega is plotted. It directly reflects the absolute density of the rhythmic structures along the path of the gaze movement, tracking from the edge of the canvas straight to its very center. Along the y-axis, the pure power of the rhythm is lock-sealed, the spectral density. The blue horizontal arrow defines the exact vector of the visual stream. This is the explicit track of your pupil's gliding movement, the calculated route of attentional acceleration. Look closely at the color codification of the energetic states. The black line represents matter, the physical power distribution of the palette knife macro relief. The red line captures biology, the precise model of the high-frequency micromovements and the organic tremor of the observer's pupil. The system rigorously deconstructs the frequency space into 3 fully isolated sectors. Sector number 1 is the omega-1 zone, the zone of raw force. The black line of energy is laid out here as a wide, gentle macro wave on the far periphery of the canvas. The strokes move in massive, thick, and impasto ridges. At this specific frequency, the biological tremor of the eye remains minimal. The observer's gaze seamlessly locks into the stream, experiencing a free inertial transition and a sudden quantum explosion of total fixation. The second sector is the transition zone, the activation node. On the board, it is heavily marked by a red circle. This is the critical threshold where the smooth gliding of the pupil hits its very first phase barrier and is forced to completely restructure its motor mechanics. The third sector is the omega-2 zone, the vein zone, operating in a mode of rigid fixation. Look closely at the black curve. Matter literally explodes into a shattering cascade of high-amplitude, ultra-dense oscillations. The palette knife relief sharpens and constricts down to micro-grooves, becoming heavily saturated with rapid, high-contrast veins of pigment. The pupil executes a peak amplitude explosion. The biological tremor of the eye, firing at a calibrated frequency of 30 to 100 Hz, enters a dead, locked phase resonance with the ultra-dense step intervals of the physical relief. A high-frequency Moiré glitch ignites. The linear velocity drops to 0, and the fixation node flashes into existence, a vortex of maximum contrast that hermetically lock-seals the observer's pupil at a distance of 2 to 3 meters. You are physically, inevitably forced to stop right here, to fully live through and experience the divine code of sacred brutalism. Entrance into the temporal architecture. Before you is the official field diagram of the profile and trajectory of intensity of the directed vector stream ray. The graph records not a static, flat image, but a managed chronoroute of the gaze, forcefully programming the subjective time of the observer in front of the canvas Enoch and 200 angels. Along the y-axis, the perceptual energy of the directed vector stream ray is plotted. The higher the coordinate, the stronger the physical substance of the knife stroke pulls the pupil of the observer. Along the x-axis, the spatial coordinate along the stream is fixed, tracking from the edge of the painting straight to its very center point 4 chronoshutters of the trajectory. Look closely at the curvature of the thick golden line. The ballistics of the pupil are broken down into 4 strictly coordinated stages. Point A represents acceleration. This is the starting impulse on the far periphery, where the gaze is just switching and entering into the stream. Point B represents growth. A progressive increase in intensity, where the observer is tightly pulled into the structural fabric of the canvas. Point C represents sliding. A plateau of maximum inertia, where the pupil freely flies through the nanochannels of noble pigments without encountering any resistance from the medium. On this specific track, the phase difference of the rhythms is reduced to absolute 0. And finally, the culminating boundary, point D, the activation node. Here, the trajectory experiences a sharp, perpendicular fracture. The sliding of the gaze at full speed physically crashes into a solid stone gate and diffusely scatters within the multi-figured mass of the watcher's Grigori. The phase of the field spikes up to its ultimate peak. Destructive interference triggers, and the rigid chrono shutter D clamps down. The time of the observer stops right here. Look closely at the legend of the diagram. The purple channel of the terminals records the peak of the integral measure of gaze retention, while the red wave of micro-saccades from the pupil is tightly locked inside the fixation cell. The density of attention strikes the absolute limit threshold of 0.9. The kinetic stream collapses into absolute statics. You are forcefully locked inside the epicenter of catharsis for the face-to-face decoding of the divine code of eternity. Before you is the official field diagram of the combined vector field of gradients on the background of the miniature. Figure 5, the patent specification of the layout drawing. The hardware diagram visually demonstrates the vector riverbed of Quantum Theo-Realism and reveals the mechanics of how 2 independent spatial gradients mathematically combine into a single chronoroute of the gaze. The arrows of the diagram lock down the direction of the perpetual downstreaming of the observer's attention according to the strict physical rule of the parallelogram of forces. Look closely at the layer-by-layer separation of the hardware environments. The blue arcs and the co-directed blue arrows represent the gradient nabla H, the direction of texture and tone. The blue arcs form the spatial field of the riverbed itself, while the blue arrows indicate the direction of the perpetual downstreaming of the gaze across the surface of the canvas, setting the trajectory of photon movement. These are the power rails of the directed vector stream Rai. The red guides represent the gradient nabla lambda, the geometry of the painting. They mark the rigid coordinate boundaries and the shoreline compressions of the riverbed. Their task is to geometrically compress the wavefront, preventing the observer's attention from scattering or drifting toward the periphery. The coordinated vectors form a stable directed corridor. Now look at the red diagonal. This is the trajectory of the vector Rai, the resulting vector of the observer's gaze movement at a sacred distance of 2 to 3 meters. It is obtained according to the strict law of the addition of forces nabla H and nabla lambda. The entire engineered retention system forcefully accelerates the pupil along the riverbed of the stream, from the edge of the canvas to its geometric and semantic center. The vector Rai pierces the waveguide at full speed and crashes directly into point D, the activation node. The braking shutter activates, and the peak of attention density ignites. The diagram experimentally proves that the value of the canvas Enoch and 200 angels lies in the total management of vision and time, which is impossible to copy in digital form, but can only be lived through in person, face-to-face with the substance of the knife stroke. This concludes the comprehensive engineering breakdown of the Quantum Theo-Realism system. The complete spiral, unifying all 5 fundamental hardware graphs, sequentially demonstrates the operation of the painterly hardware and the directed vector stream Rai. From the superposition of the Fourier spectral density phases and the heat maps of perceptual load, the vector stream is born and mathematically proven, meticulously aligned across all layers and meanings of the substance. It is precisely at the intersection of these coordinate fields that the Rai pigment mirage, which creates the physical effect of a scorching desert, interacts with the directed vector stream, whereby, at the exact point of phase resonance between the pupil and the knife stroke relief, the generation of the Rai living water occurs. This entire highly complex 5-act architecture is layered, synthesized, and materialized into the 5th fundamental law, the law of temporal optical volume Rai. To explain this law, it is necessary to reveal the nature of the effect itself. It transforms a flat image into a tangible 3-dimensional object due to the physical biological interaction of the canvas texture with the high-frequency tremor of the observer's pupil. The effect forcefully compels the human brain to convert the personal time of gaze retention into real physical distance. As a result, the central zones of the painting are naturally saturated with tectonic density and literally thrust forward, projecting an invisible 3D waveguide grid directly into the space of the room. This volume represents an absolute historical event in world culture. Until today, no one in the history of mankind has ever created a canvas as an autonomous space-time processor capable of warping the air and materializing a 3-dimensional force field right before the eyes of the viewer. At the ultimate final point, this entire wave synthesis unfolds into the ultimate law of Rai natural deficit. This is precisely what accounts for the absolute, unattainable value of the painting and the entire sovereign collection. The value of the masterpiece is lock-sealed within a unique, deficit event of human interaction with the physical knife stroke, which is fundamentally impossible to copy, digitize, or transform into the dead pixelated soap of gadget screens. This is the investment gate of eternity, engineered strictly for the private funds of Christie's private sales. All of this was granted into understanding by God.